You shushing me? All right, so everyone, here are all of Ali's secrets. Hey, we're live. You shushing me? All right, so everyone, here are. Yeah, I have no idea. I just learned. I just got into OBS yesterday, so. Yeah, recording wise, it doesn't seem to like. You don't really seem to do anything with it. You usually just use an editing software, it seems.
Alrighty, comparative mythology. It's pretty obvious what it is from the name. It's basically just comparing mythologies to come up with some kind of conclusion based off of it. Um, some conclusions that have been drawn from comparative mythology would be a Proto-Indo-European theological and mythological system that is still fairly speculative, but a lot of it's been come up and understood through comparing Vedic sources, Greek sources, Irish, etc. All the and it's very interesting. And then some others have been used comparative mythology or comparative cultural practices, even through unrelated cultures, or at least I would say. Okay.
Yeah, Kingetto. Kingetto, stop word vomiting.
All right. I thought I was going slow. All right. When
That's you thinking you're going slow. No,
yes,
no, no. Kingetto,
yes.
take a deep breath and tap your fingers and try to keep the rhythm, okay?
Okay. All right. When it comes to basically they compare various even unrelated cultures. I remember a comparison. I can't remember what the culture was specifically, but they compared that what the cultural practices there did to some archaeological finds in continental Europe around Gaul, where they would bend swords and break them in order. And it was what the conclusion was based off of the cultural practices in the other area. I think it was in. Okay, what they were doing was they were bending and breaking swords and then burying them with the dead bodies, is what it looks like. There's a bunch of broken weapons and stuff. They look brand new except for being broken and things along those lines. And then when they found the weapons, they put or when they found the weapons, they didn't know what to make of it and why they break the weapons when they put them in the tombs. Then they found some other cultures who did a similar thing. And basically, the idea in those other cultures were that breaking the weapons would kill the weapons and send them up in spirit form along with the person into the spirit realm. So that's one of the conclusions they thought that could be why they did it in those other cultures. So comparative mythology can be used in unrelated cultures as well as ones that are related, like the Indo-European ones. Okay, to put it simply, comparative mythology is using various myths and themes and cultural practices within cultures, and then comparing them to each other to come up with some kind of underlying theme, or to find just common things people have either stumbled upon, or I wouldn't say stumbled upon, but come up with, or thought of, or seen, and then see how the other cultures have done it as well. Like another example of unrelated comparative mythology, from what I've heard it or read, I can't remember exactly where I read this, but apparently several cultures have individually have multiple wind gods and things along those lines associated with the directions. That's what I've heard.
Pitfalls are that for comparative mythology is that a lot of things that may seem related aren't necessarily related, mainly because what we see with Proto-Indo-European religions in particular is that there was wide is that there's a lot of association with Mid-Eastern religions as well. Like for example, the Hittites, Near Eastern civilization, yet they have a Proto-Indo-European religion. So a lot of it is speculative, but it generally we can tell pretty well using comparative mythology how these cultures develop, and that's also assuming we have the mythology of these various cultures. Like for example, with the Norse, there's been a lot of stuff lost. There's also a good amount of syncretization with probably the Sami. Syncretization basically is when you have two religious groupings that come together, and because of prolonged contact, friendships, marriage, whatever, anything that sort of binds members of those two groups together, you end up having ideas sort of go from one side to the other, and basically the two religions become one. So, like for example, with the yeah, well, that's more about it. I mean, even the term religion itself is kind of dicey to use here when describing Indo-European traditions, because it wasn't thought of as sort of this canonical, book heavy, logic heavy. Let's try to. What? Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get to. Yeah, Ali, let me talk. They more just saw their religion as this is the way things are, is what I'm ultimately getting at. And so for example, you have Horagolus, who is, at least from the research that I've seen, is pretty much exactly four. But he's four that's been adopted by the Sami. Likewise, there are various theories and whatnot about Skadi being the traditional representation of a Sami woman. So those would be examples of cultural influence affecting sort of both groups there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in other words, the Greeks did not have what's called a religio romana. So, for those who don't know what that term means, basically the Romans did do that thing. They went around and equated various other gods to their gods. So, for example, Odin became Mercury. Uh, They can't. Speak Aliakai. Sprech. I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna mute for a sec.
Can y'all answer in the chat if you can hear Aliakai? I can hear her. Can y'all? Can y'all hear her?
Okay, I muted myself so that way I could go to the stream and see if I could hear Ali. I can't either. What's your audio capture set at? Oh, make sure that your computer is also set to capture your microphone. I had the same issue when
my computer is. It seems to be picking it up now. Can you guys hear it?
Can the audience hear Aliakai?
dead air. No.
Okay, well it's showing now. Well, I mean, there's a slight stream delay. It's showing now that my mic is getting picked up. In OBS, I mean.
You are such a cute snake.
Oh, there we go. We're getting response in the chat.
Perfect.
All right, sweet. So we at least seem to have fixed that problem.
All right, so I was at what was I at? Religio Romana.
Yeah, you were talking about how you're explaining what it is.
Yeah, so Religio Romana. Basically, the Romans went around and they equated various gods to their gods. So they would go to Mercury, they would go to Odin, and they would say, "Oh, this god is a lot like Mercury, so therefore this god is Mercury." Or
Tyrannus and Thor, or
Yeah.
Zeus. I mean, is it not Thor? It's Zeus.
Zeus and Thor,
Jupiter. Yeah.
and various others. So that's where that comes from. The Greeks did not do that.
Yeah,
And even
some Hellenists say that the Roman religion is the same as the Greek, but I am not one of them for that reason, actually, because the ancient Greeks did not do that. Even though a lot of people say, well, you know, the Greeks are Romans, like, in terms of historical times, like, Roman culture was very different from Greek culture in some aspect. They just absorbed a lot of Greek gods.
Well, yeah, not only that, but even in like the Roman areas, there were a lot of gods where either the Romans simply accepted them, like Epona. Epona was a very popular Celtic deity that even went so far in as to enter into Roma itself.
And she got her own holiday there too.
Yeah,
Or
so
they
Epona
adopted the holiday
and
that from her, but yeah.
and there are even like inscriptions to Dispater so and so. So that is basically Jupiter, Jupiter 4 or something of that nature. I can't remember. I had an exact example in my mind, but it's
like Mars Velenos would be an example of a Gaulish god syncretized with Mars.
Yeah, that's right. That's the one. So even with the Religio Romana, it wasn't always sort of set in stone that no, your god is Mars.
I think Nodens was equated to both Mars and
I think no, actually, I think it was Thor that was equated to Mars, or it was either Thor or Tyr that was equated to Mars, and Odin was equated to Mercury.
Well, I know I'm talking about Nodens. I'm not talking about a Not I didn't say Odin. I said Nodin.
Oh, you said Nodens. Okay, I heard Odin.
Odin. No, Odin was Mercury most of the time, from what I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
So coming back to, I guess, comparative mythology, one of the other pitfalls that you can find, you know, Calon kind of touched on this a little bit, is people who are trying to create sort of a unified theory of religion. You saw this kind of in a version when Campbell decided to try to do his hero's journey, mostly based off of the Greek hero's journey, but he tried to mash historical stories from a number of different sources into that mold. You also see it with Cingeto's debate, which was originally supposed to be mine, with Praise I Am, where Praise I Am tried to argue that Heracles was derivative of, I believe it was Samson.
Yeah, Samson.
Because they both had a lion and they both had love interests that ended badly, and they were both very strong.
And bees. Don't forget about the bees. It's critical.
Bees. But like the if you were to look at the very, very surface things, like compare the two myths, looks like there was some contact there, but very clearly, when you actually look at the historical record, and this is where, when you're talking about syncretization as opposed to just kind of, looking at very, very broad things, if you want to reach any sort of conclusion that can be applicable to your practice, you also have to consider the historical context, whether or not those cultures interacted or if they originated from a similar base culture. For example, various religions that appear to have spawned off of the Proto-Indo-European religion have some similarities. There's quite often a sky father that was then later usurped by a lightning deity, things of that nature, and those are historically borne out because of the source culture from which a lot of those, religious stories came from.
The funniest comparison he made, though, was when he said that he compared Samson tying the torches to the foxtails to Heracles killing the boar and then burning it.
What?
He said that boars and, I guess, foxes or possibly jackals are comparable to each other because they both got burned.
So again, like Rilla in the chat says that's called surface surfing, and yes, that's effectively what it is. A lot of folks will try to, particularly with ancient religions, kind of draw these very surface level comparisons. And, actually, there's a particularly famous atheist that, for reasons of allyship, I'm not going to mention, who is known for doing this, who will basically reduce the archetypes that are found in a number of different mythic systems to these very narrow kind of ideas, and saying, well, all religion is hokey because humans think a certain way, and this is the narrative that results from that.
Mm-hmm. Have I run across that atheist?
Yeah, you've definitely run across that atheist. He's kind of famous.
I've run across so many atheists at this point that I don't even keep track of anymore.
Our favorite Canaanite polytheist likes to go on rants about him.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Yeah, I did a stream of him once. Wow. It was a very hostile stream. Anyhow.
So, Cingeto, you had a particular reason why you wanted to do this stream and some stuff you wanted to cover. Slowly this time, I hope, so the audience can understand what you're saying.
There are a lot of fun things I enjoy. Do you want me to go ahead and, before I talk about the actual stuff about it, talk about more of the advantages of it? Because there's a few more advantages I'd like to talk about.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Okay. The main advantage I want to talk about is how well it works. The main advantage I want to talk about is how well it helps religions that have a lot less textual ability and less textual evidence, especially with things like Gaulish or Slavic. When you're trying to reconstruct them, you have scant folktales and things like that spread around all over the area in various inscriptions, but you don't really have a theological understanding or a mythological base really to go on besides folk tales, and that's really hard to use. So things like Proto-Indo-European studies and other things that similar cultures or people in similar areas have come up with or have done is very helpful in understanding what speculatively could have been the religious views of them and what was likely the religious views. It also helps you interpret archaeology, like common themes with certain symbols, like the cornucopia is a symbol of wealth, stuff like that. That's another advantage I wanted to point out.
Yeah, and so a lot of times, sometimes you'll even find lost traces of religion in other various religions, like with the like looking to the Sami, for example, to find what could have been some probable Norse practices, or likewise, some things that the Norse may have done that the Sami did, because Sami itself as a religion isn't as well attested as it should be.
Well, some folks that for comedic reconstructionists that I've met actually look at some Greek practices that were syncretized. Because some Greek folks that lived in Egypt during the Alexandrian era would pick up those practices and bring them home with them.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
There are certain kinds of incense actually that are made. One in particular I'm thinking of. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I'll find it again in a second. But it was like fruit and steeped in wine with various resins and things, and you burn it. And it has a very cloyingly sweet smell, but it was used primarily in Egypt, and it ended up getting imported to Greece. And that's how a lot of people rediscovered how to make it.
Yeah. There's that. Think, what are you doing? Get over here.
Cingeto, do you have any other ideas that you want to put forward, or do you want to just kind of talk a little bit about some of the stuff that you've discovered?
I can talk about some of the stuff I've discovered. Some of the fun themes I've noticed, and this has definitely been noticed by other people. This isn't original from me, but one interesting theme would be I've seen this a lot more in the Celtic stuff than I have in others, but I know Cecil Sereth considers it Indo-European. It's about the theme of the Celtic cow and celestial goddess, and flooding and adultery. When it apparently in a lot of myths, it features the cow goddess being adulterous in some ways, probably specifically with the Sky Father figure, and then ending up getting flooded by the nephew of the waters well, or a character related to the nephew of the waters, which is kind of like the proto.
Is the flood well attested though, or is that like, because I tend to veer back and forth? Like I know the cow is a very Indo-European thing, but I'm not exactly sure about the flood. That may have been a Christian insertion. At least that is what it is for Norse. I'm not sure about what it is for the Celts.
Not a world flood, just a flood in general from the
just a flood in general.
just
Okay.
a flood in general that hits the goddess mostly. It specifically hits the goddess, which is a common thing I've seen from reading the Welsh and the Irish text. I've seen it happen several times, and when it does, that leads me to the conclusion that Siriona, the Gaulish goddess, was probably had a similar myth about how she was adulterous, probably with Tyrannus or Sukelos, and from that, she was end up flooding and getting damaged somehow, or something along those lines. The goddess in the Welsh text I can think of would be Erenhud, if I'm saying it correctly, the Lady of the Silver Wheel, and then the one in the Irish myths would be Boned.
There's also Rhiannon.
Rhiannon would be a horse goddess, though not a cow goddess.
Oh, you're talking about a cow. Okay, no.
Yeah,
that's right.
And then Boned would be the one from the Irish that has the flood myth, specifically, like not just like the world flood, but specifically just a local flood that happens specifically to the goddess from the well. That's one interesting thing I found that I've been enjoying looking through.
So
have you dug a well at your dorm yet?
Huh?
Have you dug a well at your dorm?
Can you give an example outside of Celtic mythology where, like, another example where it happened?
I can't think of anywhere it happened outside of Celtic at the moment. I just know Cecil thinks it's Indo-European. I don't know the specifics, though.
So the cow is actually also present in Norse mythos. Althumla. In fact, Althumla.
But I mean, is there a particular myth, Calon, where like that particular series of events happens?
With the flood?
Well, I mean, cow goddess, adultery, and then revenge of some kind.
There's plenty of adultery.
Well, no, I'm talking about specifically adultery by the cow goddess, because that's what Cingeto kind of suggested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the cow goddess in Norse mythos is a literal cow. So the cow is what Umir drinks off of, the milk, during the primordial days before the creation of Mythgarder.
Isn't Ymir more comparable to Yemos though, rather than the cow goddess?
No, the cow goddess is Althumla.
Oh, okay.
Althumla is the literal cow.
Wait. Okay.
Yeah. Umir, the screamer. As for like the closest that I've seen to Umir is Purusha in Hinduism, because they both are giants and they both end up getting sacrificed and their bodies used to create the world.
I mean, Ali, if you wanted a myth that I've seen in or a myth from Celtic stuff that I've speculated is involved in another type of myth or archetype that is expressed in other religions, I can give you one.
If we're talking primarily about comparative mythology, like that's kind of what I was looking at, because like themes of adultery are present in almost every mythos because they're present in almost every culture, right? But like, if you're talking about something as specific as a cow goddess gets into some kind of adultery and thing happens, or in a much more well-known case, you have the Noah flood myth and quite frequently the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the many, many similarities between those two, and the fact that those cultures may have actually interactive, so it might have been, syncretism. That's the kind of thing that I think of when I think of comparative mythology, like themes that are kind of that direct.
Right. I can actually give you a few examples. So, one example that is probably among the most common are the hero twins. There's always some sort of heroic twins. Sometimes one ends up killing the other.
The horse twins?
Yeah, horse twins, you can call them. In some mythologies, though, they are converted into heroes. And on others, they sort of remain gods. So, like, I think it's Sigurd. Or Maneuver, Snake in the Eye. I think it is I don't know what it is for Celtic mythos.
What I can think of from the Welsh sources, there's they don't I don't think they have distinct names. They might, I can't remember at the moment, but I know they're called like they're named after horses or Rhiannon or someone like that. I'll have to find it again.
Okay, yeah. And an interesting thing, and here's an example of comparative mythology, is that for a lot of heathens, they will say that Tyr is actually the high god. And the reason why is because Tyr, the name, etymologically goes back to Deus Pater. Deus Pater is the Indo-European name for the sky god, which becomes Deus, or English Zeus, and Eupater.
Wait, then what does Odin's name go back to? Does it correspond to the Indo-European pantheon at all?
I haven't been able to trace it back that far yet, but it goes to the Proto-Germanic Woldenas, which roughly is like rage, fury, wildness sort of thing. It's Odin as a god himself is actually pretty complicated. And that is a whole nother discussion. There's haven't really been able to find a god quite like Odin.
Okay, makes sense. I do know if you want something more along syncretism or an idea of syncretism, when I was reading the book Lady in the Mead Cup, I know that the author thinks that Lugus and Lu and that theme probably could have possibly been influenced by Woden, or they could have influenced Woden, because there's a lot of similarities between Lu and Odin, with the idea that Lu is the leader of the war band. Lu is called the Squinter, so it suggests he's one-eyed, or at least uses one eye. I know he uses one eye when he fights Balor, and then he uses a spear.
Balor's the one that has one eye.
Lu had one eye when he was aiming at Balor's eye.
Oh, okay.
Closed one eye to do it, and he's also called the Squinter in some of his epithets. So there's an idea that he might be one-eyed, or at least being one-eyed is a prominent aspect of him. And then Lu's also associated with the Oath, because his name meant oath in the Slough. His name was supposed to mean oath, and then things along those lines. So he's similar to Woden. He's also liminal, like Woden is.
Mm-hmm.
Is that more what you're looking for, Ali, for comparative stuff?
Yeah, stuff that's, stuff that is more than just sort of coincidental.
Well,
On the subject of mythic twins, two of the most famous are Castor and Pollux, also known as the Gemini twins.
Gimini.
Gemini.
And what's kind of interesting about Castor and Pollux is, Calon, you kind of talked about, well, sometimes they end up with divinity, sometimes they're mortal, sometimes they're heroes, sometimes they're not. Castor and Pollux are kind of all of those things. They're half divine, because after Castor was kind of dying, Zeus approached Pollux and offered him, either you can come to Mount Olympus with me and be immortal, or you can give half of your immortality to your brother so y'all can stick together. And, he ended up opting to do that. So they spend, much like Persephone, they spend half the year in Hades and half the year on Olympus.
Yeah, there you go. There's your example.
So you talked about various twins having those sorts of things. There's also obviously a couple of twins among the Greek gods.
Yeah. One doesn't exactly come to mind at the moment, but yes.
There's Apollo and what's Mercury, right? Aren't they twins?
No, Apollon is not. No, Apollon has a female twin.
Oh, okay.
I'm surprised we're talking about comparative mythology, and you didn't know that Apollon and Artemis are twins? The sun and moon. Or rather, Helios had more dominion over the sun, but eventually, in later Greek mythology, it was said that after he was overthrown, that Apollon would drive the sun chariot. Or that Apollon was more like the god of the sun's light and warmth, whereas Helios was like the actual being that embodied the sun itself.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, yeah. Those are your examples from Greek mythology. Should really look into Hittite mythology. I need to look into that more.
I know there's a serpent slaying myth. Oh, that's a good example. Serpent slaying myths are super common, but I know there's a serpent slaying myth from a depiction from a Hittite thing. That's all I can remember from Hittite mythology at the moment.
There's also serpent slaying in Norse mythology with Jormungandr, or Midgardsormr and Thor, and in Hindu mythology.
Apep and Ra in Kemetic mythology.
There's also in Celtic mythology, there's a serpent slaying myth with Tyrannus. There's a serpent slaying myth with Finn McCool, and then there's one with, or I guess serpent taming, but whatever, specifics don't matter. And then there's one with Lu, I think.
And there's also in Hindu mythology, you have Indra and Vritra.
Vitra. Similar to Veles, from what I've heard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Hinduism is actually really useful when it comes to comparative mythology, surprisingly.
I'm reading some Hindu stuff on theology, getting some ideas for stuff like that too. It's great. I love.
Well, speaking of Apollon also has a serpent slaying myth. He killed the gigantic serpent at Delphi. There's a bunch of different reasons that are given as to why he did this. The one that I grew up knowing a little bit about was it wouldn't let him set up the oracle there. It was, killing people and making a disturbance, so he killed it, but there's a bunch of different versions of that myth.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that one of the versions of it stated that the kind of sulfury gas that came out of the oracle at Delphi was its rotting corpse.
That's a good theological myth. I like that. That's totally the reason, by the way, now. That's the official reason why.
The myth of Apep, by the way, had to do with whether or not it was cloudy outside, which is very, very rare in Egypt. But effectively, what would happen was Ra would drive the sun chariot, which, Ra, Helios both drive sun chariots. There's another bit of comparative mythology for you, though we know for a fact the Greeks and the Egyptians had contact. So when Ra would drive his sun chariot to the edge of the earth, which they believed was flat, he would descend into the underworld and fight the serpent Apep. And if he won, then the sun would rise the next day. If he didn't, then it would be cloudy, and they believed the sun would not rise.
Yeah. So, yeah, that is a very common one. Also, the motif actually of just sort of the sun being like a chariot and whatnot.
That's super common.
That's probably
Like-
got some Proto-Euro-Indo-European roots, doesn't it?
I think so, but I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure it does, given how common it is. Like, it's in Norse mythology, it's in Greek mythology, it's probably in Celtic mythology.
It is.
I think it's in Finnish mythology, which also
Really?
Finnish isn't technically Indo-European.
Yeah, it's. I forgot what you
But
just said. I didn't think it
It
was
has
Indo.
such an influence on Indo-European that it's counted among paganism, or at least I count it among paganisms. I think the technical term for it is Suomenutsko.
So, one of the negative ways in which these sorts of comparisons can be used, kind of coming back to talking about the debate that Cingeto had with praise, is that groups, I'll say folkists, in addition to, people like Christians, that are trying to unify the world under one particular religion or under one particular worldview. They often can use comparative mythology to try to state that all the other stories come from their text. In fact, this happens quite often with certain kinds of fanatical young earth creationists who like to talk about how, after the Tower of Babel screwed up everybody's ability to speak, I guess, whatever early language was unified for humans according to the Bible back then. I guess Hebrew, since nobody.
That's what they think. I remember. I used to think that we'd speak Hebrew in heaven.
Because
You're
of
speaking
the
Gaelic,
Tower of
Evan.
Babel, all of the Bible stories just got screwed up over time through the ultimate game of telephone. And so they'll try to pull, mythology from radically different places. And if they can't tie it to the Bible, they'll say that demons told people that.
Oh, definitely. And Nephilim Free believes that I think Freya, Odin, and Thor are a perversion of the Holy Trinity. I know.
Oh.
So, comparative mythology is something that can be fun to study, but unless there's actual, syncretism involved with the cultures that you're talking about, chances are it.
Culture.
Or
a common protoculture.
Yeah, or a common or a common root culture between them. It can be fun, but not necessarily all that useful. Apart from perhaps a sociological or psychological study, which is these are the sorts of themes that both humans find important when we tell stories, and that the gods appear to show us about themselves. These are the ways in which the gods are similar to us.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Because we've talked at length here about how, mythology isn't necessarily truth in the sense that it really happened. None of us here are mythological literalists.
Hold up.
You're not a
You
mythological
mean that
literalist?
the sun isn't a chariot?
Yeah, you don't think the sun's a chariot? What?
I hate to
What?
break it to you guys, but no, it's not.
No. Hold up. This is blasphemy.
Yeah, I think we need to kick Allie.
How can the sun not be a chariot?
Yeah. How does it move
How
if it's
can
not a
Peter
chariot?
literally not eat the sun? I don't. No.
How does it move if it's not a chariot?
Exactly. It has to have wheels.
There you go. It is a wheel. It's a circle.
Yeah, and the circles have to. They have to blow down water. But I mean, how do you think dew comes in the mornings?
Yeah. It's science.
Exactly. This is pure science, Allie.
You guys trolling me made me lose my thought, so congratulations.
We're just talking about literalism.
Well, I was saying, even though we aren't mythological literalists, there are certain aspects of the gods that, Calon and I have talked about this at length. The gods reveal parts of themselves to us through inspiring mythology. Even even folks who would consider themselves to be Platonists agree that, no piece of lore about a god will come into being without some degree of that god's consent, even if it's just to teach that person a lesson. And so when you're talking about stories from history, when you're talking about sort of confirmed mythological stories, what you end up finding a lot of the time is that the gods have revealed some truth about themselves through the story, even if the story itself never happened. And this is, perhaps a very Greek way of looking at it, because a lot of Greek philosophers did actually see mythology in this way.
Yeah, that's this Greek stuff. I don't know about it, Cingeto. I mean, the sun,
Like
the sun
barbarian
isn't literally a
stuff to me.
chariot. What is
Yeah,
this?
sounds like barbarian stuff to me.
Yeah, it really does.
You guys don't even seem to get that Barbar is you two, because you two are the ones who are not speaking Greek. You guys aren't worshipping the Greek gods. Like, barbarian just meant anyone who doesn't speak Greek.
I'm sorry, Cingeto. Did you hear something? I couldn't hear her while she was
I didn't
speaking
hear
that
anything.
barbar
I
stuff.
can't hear this blasphemy. I've trained myself against it.
Okay, yeah, I have too. Sorry, what was that, Ali?
I am here under protest. So, do you guys have any other examples of comparative mythology, or any more comments that you would like to make about its use, or examples that you can think of bits and pieces
I
that are
think
similar?
one example I can think of is actually from that is what Thor gets called Oku Thor. And one of the thoughts is that Oku, which means cart, the other thought is that it could be a corruption of the Finnish.
Calon, your mic from the chat.
What?
We have a Calon, your mic from the chat. I have to draw attention to it.
Anyhow, I need to finish explaining. So.
Nope, no, you don't. You need to be trolled because you just did that to me. So, Calon, your mic.
Anyhow, so one of the thoughts is that this Oku could refer to Ukko, who is the Finnish god of thunder and lightning and whatnot. So, yeah, that's a neat little one.
Well, another example, actually drawing from Native American mythology, coyote and raven have a lot of similarities between the Salish versus the sort of Central American / Plains natives. Both of them have, depending on the culture, various creation myths. Both of them are kind of on the line between deity and spirit, in terms of like the way that Western folks would try to classify that, because there really isn't much of a difference at least in my culture, between a deity and a spirit, other than just what the deities are credited with doing, like how big the scope of what they take care of is. Like all of the spirits were kind of divine in origin, but like Raven and Coyote have a lot of similarities, and Raven himself has a lot of different stories and a lot of different meanings to, coastal peoples in particular.
Right. Cingeto?
I was just saying that's how it is with Gaulish stuff when it comes to deities and spirits. Their main difference is only in the scope, really.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to say. But yeah.
Yeah, and I'm kind of leaning towards the idea that maybe probably like Devagar, which are dwarves, I guess is how we call it in English. They were probably also more akin to gods, or at least a different tribe of gods, as are the Alfar. But yeah, that's based off of a little bit of UPG as well.
Somebody's got piano playing in the background.
Yeah, I think that's probably me. We'll survive.
I like it. I don't know.
Well, now I get to legitimately Calon your mic. In all seriousness, though, in terms of kind of talking about the various ways in which those stories intersect, some major cultural derivations of various stories were actually lost because of comparative mythology. What a lot of scholars would do in the so-called New World during, particularly the 1800s and 1900s, is they would record an aggregate version of various myths between cultures and sometimes within the same culture rather than the way that individual storytellers would tell it, which is where comparative mythology can actually become problematic for cultures with primarily oral traditions. Because, for example, Raven steals the sun or Raven steals the moon is very different thematically in Haida than it is like in Tlingit. And the Tlingit version of the myth, like, even varies between storytellers, between, like, family groups, clan groups, etc. And so when you're talking about the meaning of that story, or you're talking about the story itself, if you try to aggregate those two versions based off of commonalities, you're actually losing a lot of nuance. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's where you need a lot of checks and balances as well. Of course, granted, the other issue, I guess the issue that you run into with like European stuff is that, well, and actually also Native American stuff, because the Christians did the same thing. They just came in and wiped it all out, or you have to interpret it for a hostile lens.
Yep.
So yeah.
The Christians like to accuse a lot of people of cannibalism and human sacrifice. Like, over half of the cultures they accused of cannibalism did no such thing.
Well, and the crazy part is, it's the Christians who are doing the cannibalism.
Yep,
I mean, they go and they eat their God.
Yeah.
So I don't understand this. Is this like just some sort of huge projection on their part?
The Greeks cannibalized too. No, I'm kidding.
Hashtag transubstantiation.
Yeah, transubstantiation. They eat the flesh and drink the blood of their god.
So, what advice would you guys give to somebody who might be looking into comparative mythology or might notice some comparisons between different mythological systems, who would, say, want to avoid some of the pitfalls that we talked about?
So, stick with scholarly stuff. So, like Dumuzel and Campbell is good if for an introduction, but do not overly rely on him, because basically all he did was he set sort of the foundation for further analysis.
Campbell, I would say Campbell can almost be tossed out if you're looking at anything that isn't European, because a lot of the structure that he noticed is not present outside of Europe.
Yeah, pretty much.
You start trying to apply that to, say, Native American stories, and you're going to get confused very fast.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and Dumuzel is he's okay.
He's best with the Roman stuff.
Yeah, he's better with Roman stuff than he is with, say, like Norse or
Celtic.
I don't know. Did he do Celtic stuff?
I think he did some. Not much, but some, I think. I'll have to look into it again.
Yeah. And other than that, also look into folkloristics. That's another important part of it. And yeah, that would be my advice. Cingeto, you better give better advice, or else I'm kicking you off.
Say that every stream. But yeah. What Calon said, but also remember, if you don't have any scholars to support it, but you still think it might be there, I definitely do a lot of research and get a lot of sources when you do it, and like make sure you know exactly where these things came from, or at least have all the ideas of where it came from. Another important part is to not just
the other important part is Cingeto, breathe and talk like you're talking, not like you're trying to throw your words up all over somebody's feet.
Cingeto, tap your fingers onto each other and keep that rhythm.
The other important...
I feel like I need to apply an audio filter and slow you down by 25%.
Anyhow, Cingeto, continue.
The other important part is to make sure you keep the sources of what you have, and make sure you still remember the original stories and where it came from, and not just ignore them once you come with a comparative aspect or comparative idea. Because a lot of people will throw away the variations and stuff, and like what Ali was talking about, and it's important to not throw them away, but to keep them all, to understand the variations when you do the comparison.
Well, especially because if you're looking for themes, often those variations can tell you what a particular tribe or group saw within that particular myth. Or in the cases of Greek stuff, which we keep coming back to because, hi, hello for all of you who haven't been here before, I'm a Hellenist. So
No,
Greek
wait.
is the stuff that I come back to.
Greek?
I'm Haida, but I'm a Hellenist.
Wait, so you worship the Greek gods?
Calon,
You got a
I'm gonna stick
problem.
my foot so far up your butt you're gonna have to swallow it to get it out.
Cingeto, I think we got a problem here.
I think we do too.
I'm not sure about this, them Hellenist stuff.
I don't
It's
know.
very barbaric.
Some Hellenists.
So coming back to what I was saying, another example of sort of like comparative mythology within the same system are the various variations on Aphrodite's myths, or in Greek, mythology. There were a number of different compilations of, say, the family tree of the gods, the genealogy of the gods. The most famous being that Herodotus had a very different idea of the gods' genealogy than, say, Aristotle or Plato did. And
But they're
so,
both correct.
but technically they're all correct and technically they're all wrong, because effectively what this tells you is what their particular group, or what they as individuals saw as the relations between the god concepts that they were talking about, or between the aspects of the gods as they understood them. In addition to that, various creation and birth myths that you would find all over Greece, or, say, epithets of gods that were only found in particular areas, told you about aspects of the gods that those areas venerated, and it could give you a deeper picture about what that god represented. For example, a very, very good video by Overly Sarcastic Productions pointed out the very warlike aspects of Spartan Aphrodite, which, really wasn't found anywhere else in Greece. But at one point, they actually gave, her separate epithets when they were talking about these things, and then eventually it was split off into almost two different goddesses.
Exactly. So yes, you can even have regional variation. And you have to take into account for that. I know for also in terms of the Norse, so Odin is considered to be the traditional chieftain for the Norse. However, in the why is the name slipping me right?
Teutonic or Anglo-Saxon?
No, not the Anglo-Saxon, the Danish.
Hey, Inquisitive Quandary's hanging with us.
The Gesta Danorum. That's it. In the Gesta Danorum, Uller becomes the chieftain when Odin gets outlawed. So what that to me indicates is that even among different areas within the Norse, you probably had different gods being considered different chieftains by different tribes and whatnot. So there's that. So always keep regional variation in mind.
Well, yeah, and when I talked about the Raven Steals the Moon story, the variation between two fairly... yeah, I am. I've been having some back problems, so I was taking some medicine for that, and I choked on it.
Ah, okay.
But another example of regional variations involved, depending on which island you were for the Haida culture on Haida Gwaii, depending on which island you were on, you'd find a slightly different version of the Raven Steals the Moon myth versus the Tlingit, which had a different version also. And so all of those give you different aspects of Raven as a deity and also of that story's symbolic meaning.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Hey, Witchy Poo's in the house.
Awesome. We have everyone here tonight.
So sometimes it's worth it to even compare when you're talking about mythology, various translations as well. Particularly if you don't speak the language that you're reading from. Calon, don't go get all judgy with everybody. Um,
I'm
sometimes
jumping
reading
hard
various
right.
translations and sometimes reading various like footnotes and back notes and acknowledgments and such on the various translations, you can glean a more detailed understanding of what the original language was conveying. Again, coming back to Greek stuff, there are a lot of words that there are multiple words for what would be considered a single concept in English. And when
Like
you're
love.
trying, yeah, love is the one that everybody thinks of, but there are a number of different other concepts or words that don't exist in English at all and to have a very, very rough translation. And so, sort of studying a bunch of different translations of those stories and reading the scholarly footnotes can also teach you a great deal about what that story meant and what purpose it might have served.
Or you could do what's even better and just learn the language.
Not
Right?
everybody is a college student who has all the time in the world to just learn languages.
Yeah, I don't have all the time in the world, and I'm a college student.
I don't think most college students have all the time in the world.
Yeah, compared to working full time, it depends.
I mean, it really depends. The difference between working people and us, working people actually get paid. We actually pay to do our work. Just
I mean,
saying.
I've been on both sides of that, and I will say that working full time, I thought honestly, I worked full time and was in college at the same time, so I guess that doesn't really count.
Yeah, no, you don't count. No. Mm-mm. You're invalid. Totally. Out. Anyhow, jokes aside, what were you saying?
What I was saying effectively was that if you go through translations, and this is, for folks who are coming over here from Naka's channel, which I know there's at least one of you in there, that you guys hear me frequently say that, being any kind of pagan, particularly a Reconstructionist, it's a religion that comes with homework. And when I'm talking about stuff like the various translations or Calon talks about learning the native language, a number of us decide to do that because of those nuances, because of the difficulty in understanding the mythology in a cultural context without understanding, even the way that certain words are used. Like, shit, fecal matter, and poop all mean the same thing, but they're used very differently. And you find something very similar in other languages.
Well, you find it in English too. Like we have this little word called to get, which can mean everything from to receive to do you know.
Yeah,
Like you
and
get it?
and then you have, when you talk about Greek is what I would call a very, very precise language because quite often people would just create words when they didn't have words for things, as opposed to trying to find another use for an existing word.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, as far as ancient languages go, yeah, I could see that.
And then you have Haida, and I don't even want to get into Haida because Haida.
Latin is actually infamous for basically having words with pages and pages filled with definitions for what they mean, like polare.
And then you have, languages like German, which they like to combine words together into Frankenwords.
Oh
yeah.
my.
Well, let me continue here. So like you have words in Latin like polare, which mean everything from to raise to raise as in to pick up and raise to destroy. In German, they are a lot more they're a lot more precise with their especially with their technical terminology, especially when they start slapping prefixes onto various words like Vernehmen versus Nutzen, and then versus Nutzen, and various other words, which those nuances are so tight that I'm not going to get into them right here. I might go into them on my channel at some point because that's more linguistic stuff. But yeah, that's how those go.
And so when you get into comparative mythology, even if you find similar themes, the meaning of that story to those two different cultures may be radically different.
Right. Exactly.
In the case of serpent slaying myths, in some cultures, the serpent slaying myth is actually portrayed as a tragedy, and in some, it's a blessing. Some have it as a feature of the end of the world. some have it as a daily occurrence. The myth of Apep means something very different than the myth of Apollon slaying the python to form the oracle, which has a very different, meaning than the example that you gave.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And so, even though you find the serpent slaying myth across these various cultures, when you look at it within the context, it might be fun to think about, well, why that particular imagery meant something so different between those cultures, like where the commonalities are, or what caused that derivation, or whatever. But remember also that context does matter.
Wait, context matters? No. Cingeto, are you hearing this blasphemy?
Oh my, this is more Greek propaganda.
I think it is too. I think we're gonna have to cancel her.
Oh my god, the rats are all trying to fit into one, like, tiny freaking hammock, and it's adorable and hilarious because they're like laying on top of each other. Sorry, for those of you, I wish that I wish that Zoom was working with OBS, because I could turn my camera on and show you guys my adorable rat babies, which they're only half grown, so they're still very small.
And I could show my adorable little snake. But yeah. Anyhow, what else?
So, do we have any closing thoughts? We're hitting about an hour. It looks like we're getting pretty close to wrapping up.
Closing thoughts are that, Cingeto, we need to have a conversation about this barbarian that has entered our midst.
Yeah, I think we need to settle this soon.
I mean, if y'all want to do that, like, I don't know how you're going to manage to stream, but, okay.
Well, okay, look, some uncivilized technology has to be permitted here, okay?
Or, like, get certain collaborative things made, or...
Look, I know all that uncivilized stuff, because it's uncivilized, by the way, because it's the Hellenists doing it. Look, we have to allow some uncivilized behavior here, okay? Would you agree with that, Cingeto?
Of course, always.
All right. Hey, chat, can I get a Calon your mic from all 10 of you?
Oh boy.
Give it about 30 seconds.
The snake's about to wrap around the microphone. Who's my little... Well, you're not technically a legless lizard, because you still have a mandible, a jaw, but still.
So, wait, has the chat gotten the Calon your mic?
It doesn't look like we've gotten there quite yet.
I think the chat's frozen.
Oh, there we go.
Uh-oh.
There we go. Now we're getting the Calon your mic.
Tell him, Snakey. Oh, okay. I didn't actually expect you to stick your tongue out.
Now we even got a couple of lurkers Calon your micing. Cingeto, how are you doing on the merch? Because, like, this needs to be a shirt. We have actual people who are actually wanting to buy this shirt.
I'm still working on the picture. I don't know how I'm going to get it onto the...
I'm just looking at all these people I need to ban. I'm sorry, what?
I still have to find a shirt company for it.
Oh, there's like Teespring and a whole bunch of other places that'll do that kind of thing.
What's Teespring? I don't.
There's a bunch of different companies. Like, once you have the actual designs done, like, leave the rest to Calon and I. We can handle that.
Perfect. Okay, and then I can give you one example of really bad comparative mythology if you want me to end it out on that.
Sure. I mean, we've already given the Samson example from earlier.
Yeah, this one's not as bad as the Samson one, but it's still pretty bad. Okay, so there's this guy, Garrett Olmsted. I like a lot of his stuff, but he had a really bad example in his book. Okay, basically he compared Nataswelta to Persephone's, which makes sense to an extent. But then he compared Nataswelta to the Welsh character of the Flower Maiden. I can't say her Welsh name because I'm not good at Welsh.
How do you spell it?
It starts with a B. It's Bloodwen, something like
Bloodwing?
I think so. It's the flower.
Bloodwing?
Yes, the Flower Maiden, the maiden made out of flour, the consort of Thlu.
I'll look it up and then I'll pronounce it.
But then he compared Nantasvolta because of the myth of Persephone's picking flowers, and it was bad. It's a
Hey,
bad
look, Wolf
comparison.
is coming in on the tail end. Welcome, Wolf.
Hey, Wolf.
Blue with. That's how you would roughly say it. Oh,
Oh,
bye, Wolf.
bye, Wolf. But yeah, that was a particularly bad example because it, and then he compared and he speculated that the name of Nantasvolta could possibly be translated to "she who makes the valley bloom," which compares her to flowers, and then links her to Persephone's picking the flowers, and then which links them to Bledowin. So that was a particularly bad example because it's so weak and it doesn't make any sense. Because Nantasvelta is the consort of Sukelos from the sites and stuff we found, and images and depictions of her. So when it comes to that, it this doesn't make sense and it doesn't add up. That's an example of particularly bad comparative mythology.
All right, so are we going to be heading over to Discord for the after show then?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we're going to cancel Cingeto.
Alrighty, so for those of you who are part of our Discord, if you're not already, the link is in the description. We usually head over and do an after show for a little bit where we talk to anybody who's got any questions about the topic that we covered or anybody who wants to add anything that we missed. So we're going to head on over there, or at least Calon and Cingeto are. I might have to actually head upstairs for a little bit, just because my partners, one of them is actually home, and the other one is injured, and I've been having to take care of him, and he'll be home
How do
pretty
you
soon.
injure yourself?
The same way that I injured myself.
Oh,
That entire thing. He got his foot burned.
like partner, like Allie.
So anyway, we're going to head on over there. Thank you so much for tuning in. For those of you who are new, apologies that this one was a little bit less organized than they usually are. Not only am I dealing with some tech issues, I'm trying to get used to the setup on the new computer, and I'm getting some weird errors and stuff, so I need to figure out what's going on with OBS, and if I can get it fixed, then hopefully we will be able to have a higher quality stream for you guys. So we're going to head on over there, and we'll see you there.